Great. Well, thank you very much for your warm welcome this morning. It's really great to meet you guys. As you can see, today's passage is a bit on the bleak side. And it's not as famous as Job chapters 1 and 2. And sometimes it just gets kind of pushed into the long debate that follows. I'm assuming that you might know something of the story of Job, how he was famous as the greatest man of the East, not just financially, though he was that. He was fabulously wealthy, but also he was great morally. God himself says to Satan, "Have you not seen my servant Job, who does what is right?" And Job's troubles fall on him because of Satan's accusation that Job is just like a spiritual gold digger. He doesn't love you for you, he says. Job's only in it for what he can get. If you take all that stuff away, he will curse you. And that accusation being so serious, one of only loving God for what we can get out of him, that Satan is allowed to put it to the test. And first, Job loses all his wealth and his children in a single day in disaster. His children killed in a building collapse while raiders and natural disaster took his wealth. And then his health fails. Yet in all of that, he continued to trust God, and Job never knew the reason for it. But just by his continual faith, he glorified the Lord in the heavenly realms, didn't he? It was a great big L on the forehead of Satan. Now, this won't be as bleak a sermon as the passage, but I don't want to tack on glib answers to the problem of grief and suffering, a battle that for many is the toughest fight of their lives. I want to focus on three features of Job's grief to help us understand grief and to help comfort someone who is grieving, especially as sooner or later we will, and possibly right now, we will all either know someone in that situation or we might be that person who needs the comfort of the gospel, to understand Job's suffering and to see, actually, that's not beyond the realms of possibility for a believer who is walking rightly with God. So here's the first point that I want you to notice. Chapter 2, verses 11 to 13. Just notice Job's loneliness. Job's loneliness. Now, you might think this is an odd title to these verses to talk about Job's loneliness when they're about his friends coming to comfort him, especially as they are good friends. So have a look at verse 11. So when Job's three friends, Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, and Zophar the Naamathite, heard about all the troubles that had come upon him, they set out from their homes and met together by agreement to go and sympathize with him and comfort him. Now, there's not much we know from their names and places of origin about these three men, but we do know that they're from different tribes and in different places. This is before the invention of the telephone or the bus, before even the invention of the wagon. So these guys heard the bad news about Job probably by merchants as they brought the news and the gossip from different regions on their camels or donkeys. So it would have taken a while to reach them. And then they would have sent messengers to each other to coordinate their visits. And then they would have had to ride or walk the long distance from neighboring countries to meet up and then to travel together to see their old friend Job. So by the time that they get there, Job's sorrows must have been going on for several weeks or probably more like several months. But they've invested this tremendous amount of time and effort because they have come to comfort him. Now, Eliphaz is the one name that we know something about. This is an Edomite name. It's listed in a few times in the family tree of of Edom, of Esau. And Teman was an Edomite town renowned for its wisdom, a kind of Athens or Cambridge of the ancient world. So when it says that they came to sympathize with him and comfort him, the sort of comfort they hope to bring is probably less of the chocolates and cup of tea variety and more of the providing counseling services for Job, to help Job think better of his situation, to listen and so to respond in a way with words that will put it all into a context where he can cope and move forward with his life. But as they draw near, this is not the Job they remember. Verse 12. When they saw him from a distance, they could hardly recognize him. So a lot has been made in the last couple of months of actor Brendan Fraser's change in appearance over his 2-decade battle with depression. The jokey, likeable, shirtless George of the Jungle and the Mummy film franchise has become a shell of the man that he was. It's not just the aging process, but the slower patterns of speech and haunted look in his eyes. Overwhelming grief changes your appearance. The cumulative sleepless nights and mental confusion affect your skin and mannerisms. The loss of appetite, either for food or activity, or both, can cause major changes in body weight. The lack of motivation to care about your appearance or all take their toll, and they don't recognize their old friends. And theirs is not the reserved British way of showing grief either. Look at the passage. They began to weep aloud, and they tore their clothes and sprinkled dust on their heads. To tear your clothes is a sign of grief, saying that the identity you wear is of no value in the face of death. Putting dust on your head is a reminder of your mortality. From dust we are, and to dust we will return. It's an act of solidarity with Job's dead children and Job's own apparent impending fate. But the great tragedy of their visit is that despite of all their good intentions, their huge investment of time and effort, their wisdom and their genuine sorrow at Job's suffering, is that in the face of such tragedy, they have absolutely nothing to say. So verse 13, then they sat on the ground with him for 7 days and 7 nights. No one said a word to him because they saw how great his suffering was. Now, I know a lot of people see this as a good example of just being with people in grief. And I suppose it's better than if they turned on their heels and walked home. But as Christopher Ash points out in his commentary on Job, this is not how you greet your friend in deep pain. Even in the ancient worlds, this is how they held vigil around a coffin. It all adds to his isolation, even in company. There's nothing they can say or do to help him. They've come to counsel him, but they've got nothing. He is out of their reach. He is terribly alone. But Job is doing what many people suffering trauma do. He is going round and round in his mind, trying to find the source of his troubles. Which day was it where it all started to go wrong? If you could go back in time and change one thing, what would it be? What was his mistake? And for some, it's very obvious. It's that harsh word that ruined a relationship. That glance at the mobile phone that caused the crash. That first experimentation that later became an addiction that took everything away. But for Job, it is much harder to pinpoint. Well, beginning of chapter 3, after this, Job opened his mouth and cursed his day. Now, in the Bible that was read to us, it says that the day of his birth. In Hebrew, it actually says his day, and they've added the day of his birth to make it easier to understand. But from the context, it seems that he's actually referring to the day of his conception. He's going back even further. That's where the trouble started. So Job, we've seen his loneliness. Second, we see Job's longing not to exist. So chapter 3, verse 2, he said, "May the day of my generation perish, and the night that said, a man is conceived, that day, may it turn to darkness. May God above not care about it. May no light shine on it. May gloom and utter darkness claim it once more. May a cloud settle over it. May blackness overwhelm it." He's saying, I want to erase that day from history and everything that happened in it. Now, if you've seen it, this is the premise of the Terminator film. He wants John Connor himself so that he was never conceived, so would never become the man that he is. Verse 6, "That night, may thick darkness seize it. May it not be included among the days of the year, nor be entered in any of the months." See, he wants to mark his birthday every year, not with cake and celebration, but by blotting it out completely. May it be just a day of sorrow, where nothing happens, where the sun doesn't rise, where we don't get out of bed, where it's just misery all day. Verse 7, "May that night be barren. May no shout of joy be heard in it." Now, because he's talking about his conception, this is probably talking about his parents' lovemaking that conceived him. He's just saying, look, I wish they hadn't. Verse 8, "May those who curse days curse that day. Those who are ready to rouse Leviathan." Now, Leviathan was a dangerous sea creature of the ancient world associated with evil. He says, look, if evil is invoked, may they get busy invoking it here. May all curse and sorrow, all misfortune fall on that day. Verse 9, "May its morning stars become dark. May it wait for daylight in vain and not see the first rays of dawn. For it did not shut the doors of the womb on me to hide trouble from my eyes." He says, that's the problem. I got into the womb. If only that hadn't have happened, I wouldn't be suffering as I am. I would be better off if that had not occurred. We've got Job's isolation. We've got his longing not to exist. And thirdly, we've got Job's bewilderment. 5 times he asks the question, why? And each question is a variation on the question, look, why have I lived this life? And why am I still living it? Verse 11, "Why did I not perish at birth and die as I came from the womb? Why were there knees to receive me and breasts that I might be nursed?" Now, I've taken the funerals of babies and toddlers, and it is utterly heartrending. And Job says that he's jealous of them. It would have been better for him because regardless of what we achieve during this life, we all end up dead anyway, and he's not enjoying his life, and he would like to fast forward to the end. Verse 13, "For now I would be lying down in peace. I would be asleep and at rest with kings and rulers of the earth, who built for themselves palaces now lying in ruins, with princes who had gold, who filled their houses with silver. Or why was I not hidden away in the ground like a stillborn child, like an infant who never saw the light of day? There the wicked cease from turmoil, and there the weary are at rest. Captives also enjoy their ease. They no longer hear the slave drivers' shouts. The small and the great are there, and the slaves are freed from their owners." Saying death is a great leveler. Whatever people achieve in this life, whatever they suffer, they all end up in the grave. And he wishes that he'd gone there straight away. I've been at several births. There's that moment where this tiny, scraggly, scrawny, squawking creature is placed on the breast, and sometimes with a few false starts, it latches on, and this life-giving fluid is kind of sucked into this baby's little body, nourishing it. And Job is saying, look, I wish it had never happened to me. I wish I'd just been thrown away and exposed at birth. Then, at least, I wouldn't be feeling the way I am now. Verse 20. Why is light given to those in misery, and life to the bitter of soul, to those who long for death that does not come, who search for it more than hidden treasure, who are filled with gladness and rejoice when they reach the grave? He's saying, look, imagine the excitement of a metal detectorist going around with his detector, and after years of only finding Coke cans and discarded nails, he finds a huge Viking hoard, and he celebrates, and he's telling his friends about it. He's delighted. Or a gold miner who discovers a rich seam underground. He's saying, that is how excited I will be when I breathe my last. Verse 23. Why is life given to a man whose way is hidden, whom God has hedged in? In chapter 1, Satan complains that God has put a hedge around Job, protecting him from all evil. But now it feels like the hedge has closed him in. This man ran a thriving business, kept up close friendships in far countries, had a huge family. But now his world is hedged into this little corner of a rubbish heap. Maybe you've experienced that in a time of suffering. Your world shrunk by grief to just your house or just your bed. Your choices, and yet grief trapping you there. And Job is saying, look, I'm hedged in, and my world is, the only way it can go is just for them to lift me into my coffin and nail it down. Job's lonely. He is longing not to exist. He's asking why, and he's also restless. Have a look at verse 24. To make matters worse, depression is usually accompanied by insomnia. Maybe you know that all too well, but Job's mind is in turmoil day and night. Verse 24. For sighing has become my daily food. My groans pour out like water. What I feared has come upon me. What I dreaded has happened to me. I have no peace, no quietness. I have no rest, but only turmoil. Look, I've resisted in drawing applications until this point because I want us to go down with Job and feel how bitter his sorrow is, to see the contours of it and start to understand it. That friend of yours who, when his wife died, he just stopped going out. Or that teenager who everything feels lost. Just to understand how completely hopeless and miserable he feels. All while God says at the beginning and at the end of the book that Job is righteous in his sights and has done nothing wrong. Not that he's sinlessly perfect, but there's nothing that has led to this. And he has only spoken the truth. Which means what he said here, which sounds so outrageous, and certainly Job's friends think it's outrageous, Job says, no, that's entirely appropriate. That's entirely appropriate. No, you are expressing your sorrow honestly. And there is no criticism from God for what he has said. Which means that we can take some obvious lessons from Job's situation. Firstly, it is wrong to take your own life. Okay, Job didn't take his own life. He would like to. He would like to die. But it is wrong. And I think it's important just to state that. I went to a funeral for a man who took his own life. And the pastor quoted from his suicide notes with the permission of the family, where the man wrote, "I hope my family can all now really enjoy their lives without me holding them back." And the truth of the matter was that nothing could have been further from his perception. They loved him. That his wife and children were devastated by what he'd done and that he'd been thinking that way. And I'm not saying it's unforgivable. It's not. It is forgivable, but I am certain that man, and I'm certain that man whose funeral I went to is with Christ. But it's worth knowing, now when the sun is shining and everything's okay, it's worth knowing that when you're traumatized, you are not thinking straight. And it can be very helpful to know that suicide is always a sin. You can just skip the whole Hamlet debate, to be or not to be. No, it's not up to you. You don't need to be on the horns of that dilemma. It's not your choice. Trust the Lord. Submit to his will, even when it's not yours at all. Second lesson to learn from this. You can be this low and it still get better. Because Job was this low and it did get better. He has no idea how, but it can. Thirdly, you can feel this bad and still be right with God. And in the fog of it all, you may doubt that very strongly. And there may be other people coming along, as they do with Job, say, look, where's your faith? You shouldn't be feeling this way, you should be full of joy. And of course, there are enormous joys in the Christian life. But there are moments where even believers can sink to this level, and it's got nothing to do with a lack of faith. Fourthly, you can express thoughts this dark and still be right with God. And it may be very helpful and necessary to express it to good friends or to a counselor or someone like that, a pastor, and that be entirely appropriate and extremely helpful. Now, it wasn't. Job's friends weren't helpful to him, but believers who are familiar with the book of Job, and maybe once you've heard the rest of this sermon, might be rather more help. Because I'd like to leave you with Job's hope. We've seen his sorrows, and Job has hope. He doesn't know it. I'm not talking about hope as an emotion, because Job doesn't have any of that. He is just anticipating that whatever condition is causing all of his boils will progress and he will die, and that is the end of Job. But objectively, Job has hope. It's a very real hope because God is a redeemer. And God still loves Job. And God has sent the Lord Jesus into this world to rescue people. He sent Jesus to come into this world to live a human life and to go to the cross to rescue sinners like us from all our trouble and sin and sorrow. And the night before that, Jesus knew that was what was coming. And he was overwhelmed by his anticipation of it. And so he gathered with his disciples and he asked them to pray for him. And he took 3 comforters alone into the dark and asked them to wait up and watch with him. And he prayed I assume this was the most intense prayer of his life, as he sweat drops of blood, asking that this cup pass from him, saying, look, If there's any other way, I don't want to go to the cross. Let's have something else. Whatever it is, let's do that instead. And there in the dark, what was the answer? Silence. The answer was no. And he got told the answer no, not because there was sin in his life that was undermining his prayers, not because God didn't love him, because he did. He was the absolute delight of his Father. The answer was no, because there were plans and circumstances that were above him in his human nature, that was agreed by him in his divine nature in eternity. And now is the moment that he would have to go through with this. The next day, he was nailed to a cross in total. He was nailed to a cross. He was surrounded by his enemies. He was lifted up on that cross. He had to experience seeing guards dividing up his clothes because he was as good as dead and would never need them again. His enemies got to gloat over him. He had to see the pain in his mum's face as she witnessed all of this. And then darkness fell, and he experienced the weight and the guilt and the shame of all the sins of the world, of yours and of mine and of everyone else's. And he shouts out, do you remember? My God. The only time he doesn't call God his Father, but that's not the relationship that he's enjoying right now. My God, why have you forsaken me? For the first time in all eternity, God the Son experiences what it's like to be totally alone. And we might say, oh, well, he's quoting Psalm 22. No. Psalm 22 is prophecy. David is quoting Jesus on the cross. My God, why have you forsaken me? Now, the day before, he knew why, and he'd been explaining why he was going to the cross to the disciples. But there's something about the experience that is so psychologically shattering that he doesn't know why. He asks, why? And it's silence. But we know why, don't we? It's not that there's never a reason. There was a reason with Job, and there was a reason with Christ. There's a reason with that thing that you went through, or what you're going through now. Jesus went to the cross to give hope to Job, to give hope to you and I, so that he could set before us the hope of heaven and rescue us for it. He went there so that he could be qualified to function as your great high priest. So that when you go through those moments where your prayer isn't answered and you don't know why, he can say, yeah, that was awful, wasn't it? I know exactly how you feel. To know what shame feels like. To know what it's like to be totally alone. To know what it's like for your friends to let you down, either as they fall asleep when they're meant to be praying, or as they all run away and then swear blind they'd never met you. To say, yeah, I understand. I really do. And I love you. And all your weaknesses just evoke my sympathy. And all your failings and all your brokenness, that's not a reason why I turn away. It's a reason why I love you. And like a dad whose little child has fallen over and skinned their knee. Actually, he doesn't say, you loser, can't you even walk straight? He picks them up and hugs them and gives them sympathy and love. And represents us to his heavenly Father as his children. Look, I'd like to give you the chance to meditate on this for a moment, because we